With the new Changeling TV show just coming out, I thought it was the perfect time for me to reread one of my all-time favorite horror books and give you a proper long-form review. So today I'm going to be talking spoiler-free about The Changeling by Victor LaValle, and I'm only going to be talking about the book, so if you are interested in me doing any coverage of the TV show, let me know down below. And I don't do a lot of long-form review on my channels anymore, so if this is something you'd like to see more of, also please let me know. Otherwise, let's get into the book, starting with the premise. In this story, we follow a young man named Apollo. The story begins actually with the tale of his parents, how they got together, how he got his name, him growing up as a young boy, developing an interest in used books, which starts him off as an entrepreneur and his own business, and then you follow him as he falls in love with a woman, and then the story focuses in as they have their first child. And within the story, there is an instance, something happens that is very concerning, and the story sends his main character on a hero's journey to go and try to save his family. I do think that it's best to know as little as possible about that actual event and let yourself, if you are new to the story, be surprised when it all unfolds. But this is a beautiful story that I love for so many reasons. So much the reason I love the story is the character work, which is fantastic. Apollo is just an immediately likable character. We follow him again through his youth, and I just really love to see as he is trying to earn himself some money by reselling books. I think as book lovers ourselves, it's immediately relatable and likable. And then he has a very down-to-earth relationship with his spouse, and you get to see them as parents. And so that leads me into the first major theme of this story, and that is parenthood, which is a topic I personally love as a mother myself, but I do think will ring true for anyone, even if you are childless by choice or just simply have not had children yet at this point in life, because it really is a story about people. So as we follow this couple, they go through the process of giving birth, which, by the way, I do not read labor scenes within stories. I find it incredibly traumatic, and this one really bothers me, but it's so well done that I push through, and it's one of the very few stories that I will read the labor scene without skimming along or rushing forward, because everything about this book, if I haven't mentioned, is perfection. So within the story, you follow them as they become new parents, and then you get to see the depictions and imperfections of new parenthood. They are not masters of the craft. It is messy, it's uncomfortable, it's awkward. You get to see and hear about all the uncomfortableness of the topic and get to see that unfold. Particularly, I love within the story that there's a focus on fatherhood, which I don't think you get to see enough representation in books and movies and TV shows, and especially good representation. So not those deadbeat dads, those dumb fathers, but instead you have the depiction of Apollo, who, while is not a perfect man, attempts to be a hands-on father. He tries to get involved with the feedings and the diapers and be a true support to his spouse. And I love that positive depiction because, again, there are so many stories where the father is just the brunt of the joke. He's dumb, he's useless, and it's kind of become an old, tired stereotype and trope. Also within the story, we follow the woman and the mother, who is someone who is trying to be good at that role. And I've said before in other reviews and videos that I love stories that offer challenging perspectives of mothers. And so I like her as a character. I find her to be immediately likable, but she again is complicated, and that is complicated as you see her deal with perhaps postpartum depression. So you see her struggling as a mother and struggling with that role and getting to see how that plays into the story, which of course leads us to the major arc, which I won't give away. But the depiction is beautiful, honest, raw, and I would love to see more of it in fiction. As I've already alluded to, the story also deals with themes surrounding a fairy tale narrative. So this story begins, as every fairy tale does, with two people falling in love and the happily ever after that is supposed to come afterwards. So we follow the main character of Apollo, who is introduced as a hero of the story. He falls in love, and then the major events that I keep mentioning lead him to go on a hero's journey to save the day. This is a theme that the author just makes very clear that he is going to play with throughout the story, and continually does so in both the imagery that he uses as well as the language. You'll hear him write or say things like how the character is bewitched in love and so forth, and again just tying back to language that you typically see within a traditional fairy tale story. And so I love the intersection of fantasy, particularly fairy tale fantasy, with horror. I think it's done so well in a way that feels very comforting to an adult reader because, of course, we read those creepy fantasy stories growing up that were, of course, meant for children, but if you look back at the original works, are often really horrifying. And I think that the author does that very well, playing it into the narrative. This book, in a way, could be argued to be predictable because it does hit on those tropes, but there is so much that the author is doing on such a high level of skill that I do not mind that. Again, I find it more comforting that I kind of know where the story is going to go because there is so much horrifying material that is played within the story that I need a little bit of comfort along the way. This might be a perfect time to talk about scariness within the story, and I've often described this book to be one of the scariest books I've ever read. Now, if you follow my channel, you know that I read a lot of disturbing and messed up books, and you could make the argument, which is true, that I've read books that deal with much more gruesome, graphic subject matter. Certainly there are more horrific things that have been done to the human body than what happened within this book. But for me, scariness more comes from a mindset, from a psychological experience rather than the horrificness of what actually occurs. So for me, the story is terrifying because, as you can tell from what I've talked about so far, I was fully immersed in the story. I cared deeply for this entire family, and so I cared deeply for their well-being. This is a book I read late in the night while I was up with my son, and I just remember having such a disturbing experience with it. It was a book I intended to read just a few pages to help me fall asleep, and I remember laying awake for hours because I could not get that imagery out of my head, the kettle, everything that occurred. Reading it the first time, I was completely blindsided. I had no idea where the story was going, which again is why I always try to keep my reviews spoiler free. For those of you that haven't read this one yet, hopefully I'm encouraging you to change that. And that scene just scared me so much because for me, what it works with that scene is that it plays into the helplessness of parenthood. The fact that you can do everything you possibly can to try to protect your young child. You can do your best to follow all of the health advice and things like that. But there are certain things that are out of your control as a parent, as a spouse, and that is the hardest thing to stomach, is that lack of control. Because for me, what causes me anxiety is the things that I cannot control, and what causes me to have more peace of mind is the things that I can manipulate, control, and that is not the case in the kettle scene. So, oh my goodness. Also, I'm kind of joking, but the scene in the restaurant where Apollo sits down and realizes how expensive everything is, and is just terrified how he's possibly going to pay for this crazy overpriced meal, also terrified me simply because I'm a very frugal person, and I've definitely had that experience as a young adult where I've got myself into a really expensive restaurant that I could not afford and was horribly embarrassed trying to figure out how I was going to pay for it or how to buy or pay for the cheapest thing on the menu so I could just get through the experience. So I joke that part wasn't truly terrifying, but even the second time around, I definitely felt a lot of cringing and just not twisting in my stomach as I read it because, again, I feel like the author is incredibly skilled at writing uncomfortable scenes. Another aspect of this book that I love that I don't hear talked about enough is the use of technology, which is a great contrast to fairy tales, which again typically take place in a faraway past life where there is no technology. Instead, this book is very much set in the present day, at least when it was written, and so it deals with social media, with cell phones and all of that. It's a major part of the setup of the book where we, as Apollo's perspective, get to see how he's getting these strange photographs of his son being sent, and he's trying to figure out who is sending him, who is trolling him, which again, kind of the internet troll plays into the fairy tale narrative and language once again. And we also see him as a father, as he describes obsessively posting picture after picture of his son online and how it becomes obnoxious to all his friends and family. And so I really love what they are doing there. I think it is just so well crafted. I often say that when it comes to horror, I like authors that are not afraid to include current technology. So often things are set in the past because authors deem it to be easier, because with technology comes a lot more challenges. It's always a question of, well, why didn't that person just Google that or just call someone or send a text? And this author does a great job of introducing technology without creating those plot holes. Instead, the technology actually works within the story and honestly uplifts it. So I thought that part was brilliant and I love it so much. It's such a wonderful thing that is just the icing on the cake. From there, I don't want to give away more of the plot because that would give away the surprise, but needless to say that after the event, this story transforms into that hero narrative. We follow the character as he goes through many different adventures and challenges along the way. He meets up with different characters characters that help him on his journey. And as I've probably not mentioned yet, this author is Black and brings in Black characters to his story, making some interesting social commentary. So there's a point in the story where there are these Black men who are in this nice neighborhood in a car, and they recognize the fact that that might be seen incorrectly, or people might make assumptions based off that. But then you also get the author being very nuanced in this and not being heavy-handed, where there's another place where you have police officers who are still doing their job, but they're doing so in a way that is very kind and respectful to this Black individual. And so I love how this is all just woven into the story. It is multi-layered, it's complex, it's not simple, and it's a story that, as you can see from myself, it is worth reading again and again. I definitely got more out of it reading it once again, and I really hope that this short review would help to convince more of you to pick it up. It's one of my favorite books, and I'm very excited that it's getting adapted. So again, let me know your thoughts down below. Keep it spoiler free, or add some spaces if you're going to talk spoilers in the comments. Let me know if you're excited for the TV show and if you would like me to potentially do some review coverage of that one. And I would love to know what is another book you would love me to see a long form review for, because if you're interested in this, I can definitely do more of these on my channel if they're the kind of thing that you like to watch. If you're new here, I do read a lot of horror, thriller, science fiction, fantasy, and other dark things. If you want to help me out with this video, you can give me a thumbs up. You can drop an emoji, perhaps an emoji that represents a fairy tale. That would be great. And if you want to hit that little notification bell, you'll never miss these extra videos from me. Thanks so much for watching. Talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.